Welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, I'm going to show you how to do a clutch repair DIY style so you can save a lot of money and probably do the most gearhead thing you've ever done in your life. So let's get going. So first thing up off the bat, you are not going to start tearing your transmission apart to get at a clutch if you don't even know if you need it. So I made a really great video on how to 100% diagnose whether you need a clutch for your vehicle. So I'll post a link above to that. Please go watch that and confirm that you need a clutch before doing this job. Now today we're doing a clutch replacement on this 2008 Toyota Yaris. However, keep in mind, this will be very similar and all my tips and tricks will be good for other vehicles that are front wheel drive and transversely mounted manual cars. Now, we're doing a clutch replacement, but there might be other reasons why you are trying to drop your transmission, such as a faulty transmission, something needs to be replaced in there. You might have a leak between your engine and transmission, which is most likely your rear main seal. Could have a faulty throwout bearing, yada yada. So this is a good video for all of that, and lots of goody stuff in here, like taking out CV axles and stuff like that too. Now, one of the things that's gonna make this job a little bit daunting for people that are not used to working this much on cars is mostly due to how much has to come off to be able to just to get at the clutch. We've got to take off the battery tray, the air box, maybe part of the throttle body, our emissions, evap stuff. We've got to support the engine. We got to take wheels off. We got to disconnect probably the lower ball joints. We've got to take out CV axles, drain transmission fluid, take all of the harness and wiring and connectors off the manual transmission, separate the halves, and get this big heavy piece thing out just to get at the clutch, right? So it's a bit daunting. So here's some things I recommend that you do. You can take lots of pictures as you go. You can get a piece of paper, and as you take stuff off, literally write it in order, so that way you have kind of a reverse order of how things have to go back on. Bag and tag any bolts. So get some Ziploc bags or some containers, take the parts off, put the bolts in the bags, label them. That way you know which bolts are for what and when it goes back together. Other tricks, you can get a big piece of cardboard and kind of draw something like the transmission and poke the holes into the piece of cardboard with a little rough sketch of what the transmission looks like so that you know which one goes where. You can even poke the bolt from the other side if that's how it was mounted on the engine. So lots of little tricks to help make this a little easier to put it back together. Another trick is try to have some time put away so that you can do most of this all at one go. That way it's kind of fresh in your mind. Don't try to take this apart and then leave it for 3 months and think you're gonna be able to put it back together without any issues. Now, another thing before we even get going here is if you have some kind of like online repair manual, like AllData, like I do, or even like a forum post where somebody has been kind enough to put step-by-step this instructions from the dealership on how to do this job, there may be parts that they tell you to take off that you may not actually need to. But why do they do that then? Usually it's for the ease of the mechanic to be able to have more space to work or to be able to get other things off. But there sometimes are some workarounds. So for example, for this vehicle, it's saying that I need to take off this and take off my windshield wipers to be able to get more access. But I don't think I actually need to take that off. So I'm going to leave some things alone depending on what I think I need for space. So just a note that sometimes you don't have to take everything off that it says. And sometimes that's going to bite you in the butt because you are not going to take something off and struggle for hours to get the other part off when it would have been much simpler to just take 2 bolts and take that part off. So keep that in mind. One last thing before we get going here is if you've been watching my videos, you know my style now. I like to teach things in great detail so that it is memorable and you guys are learning this stuff. So today's video, I'm going to try a different kind of filming style. It's going to be more point and shoot and watching me work and with a little bit of talking because there's a lot of stuff to come off and I don't want this video being 2-3 hours. So with that being said, we need to clear out the top stuff here while we've got the car down low, and then support the engine, and then it'll go up to do the stuff underneath. So let's start with the top stuff. Another good trick is once you take the part off, you know where these bolts go, just put them into the holes, and that way when you're going to put that bracket in, you don't have to remember where these were or where they disappeared to. All right, now we're going to disconnect the clutch slave cylinder hydraulic lines. There's a bunch of brackets holding them. I'm not going to undo the actual bracket lines. I'm just going to undo the brackets and then push them out of the way. All right, next up is to remove some brackets for wire looms and things like that. Okay, there's two electrical connectors back here that you have to undo. This one here and one down there. Now, whether that's for reverse backup or speedometers, either way, those got to get disconnected. Now, take a final look over around where the transmission is and make sure there is no electrical connectors that are still connected, any kind of hydraulic lines. Make sure everything is free from the transmission so that it'll allow it to drop out. All right, now we need to disconnect the electrical wires going to the starter. Should be one big cable attached with the nut. And then there might be a separate kind of just clip-on connector. Make sure the wires are disconnected, and then after that there is one bolt from the right side, from the transmission side, that has to come off, and then there is one underneath coming in from the left, the engine side, and then that starter should come out. At this point, we have everything disconnected from the transmission except the driver's side engine mounts, which we're going to have to support the engine before we take that off. And we have the bolts that are going around the transmission going into the engine. Now, because we're going to have this up in the air, we're going to take off all of the bolts from the transmission going into the engine that we can access from the top here. That way the last couple that have to come off are underneath, and then that's ready for it to come off, as opposed to going up and down and getting those off. So let's take those bolts out now. All right, now I'm going to start making my drawing just so I know where my bolts are going to go for my transmission in case these are different lengths. So it doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of roughly what you're doing. Even just something like this. Now I'm going to label this the transmission side. And this one was over here. And then there was one starter one down here. And so as you start to take these out, you can just roughly kind of poke them through like that, and they'll hold their position. And then all the ones that are coming in from the transmission side will come in through here. And anything engine side will come in from the back side. That way I know which way it goes. I have one transmission bolt right here that I have to take off, so this bracket's going to have to come off, and it's a little awkward to film and for me to get in there. So there's two bolts behind that I have to access to get this bracket off, and then I'll be able to take that bolt out. All right, with that bracket out of the way, I can get that transmission bolt out now. All right, I checked, no more transmission bolts up at the top, so that's good. And the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of zap strap temporarily some of these wire looms and brackets and stuff that I have disconnected up out of the way, so I for sure don't have to kind of maybe pinch these when I go to put the transmission in, or have any issues with binding because it's hitting all that stuff. Now, in order for this transmission to come off the engine, it's going to go this way, but this is going to hit here. So we got to get rid of this driver's side engine transmission mount. However, if we do that, the engine's going to fall down a bit. So we need to support that. So let me show you a couple options for that. Now, one DIY solution to support the engine while you're dropping the transmission would be to use these ratchet straps. And you're going to have some kind of support up here. A big 4x4 or two 2x4s screwed together. And then you're going to want to rest it and build something so it's stable to sit kind of just inside where the hood would close on the left and right. And then you can put the straps all the way to the bottom on the engine side near the end, and then just ratchet up until you see the engine just start to kind of lift a little bit, and then stop right there. Now, this will work, but it's a little bit hokey, so let me show you what I'm going to use since I've got the right tool. This here is an engine cradle. You could probably rent one from a parts store. If not, it's not that big of a purchase, especially if you're going to start getting into this kind of work anyway. So all you do is you undo this knob and adjust the length of it. So like I said, it sits right in from the cosmetic side of the fender here, underneath where the hood would sit. And then lock these in place, and then you've got these little hook things here. We're going to attach two chains with some brackets to a couple really skookum spots on this engine, kind of kitty corner from each other. And then all you got to do is tighten up the handle to start lifting up the engine a bit. And like I say, you just barely start lifting it. That way you know you've got the weight of the engine, and then you can undo that engine mount. And on this specific Yaris motor, there is two 14mm bolts that you're allowed to use and take out. There's one right here that holds a bracket for a sensor here, and on the back is the same size kitty corner 14mm. Perfect. Okay, then you can take off this transmission engine mount. All right, all the top stuff is done and the engine is supported, so let's lift it up now and let's drain the manual transmission fluid so that we don't make a mess when we take our CV axles out. And we're gonna get a good look from underneath of what else has to happen. All right, really big bolt here. That's your drain plug. You got a catch can ready to catch it all. And to speed that up, you can actually take off your drain plug as well. Or sorry, your fill plug, which is up here, about halfway up. There we go. See how much faster that goes. Okay, when you're satisfied with how much you want out, you can put the fill plug back in. We'll be going back in here and putting new fluid in later. And put your drain plug back in too. While we have it up here like this, we're going to take off our lower engine covers so we got more access for the transmission to come out. Time to take the wheels off and the CV axles. So get this understand out and lower it to a nice height to take wheels off. Okay, take this wheel off and then do the other side as well. Next thing up is we're going to take the CV axle nut out here. It is a 12-point staked nut. So in order to get this off, you got to get a flat screwdriver and a punch and a hammer, and you have to try to get this that's been punched in back out, and then you get an impact gun with a 12-point impact socket and get this thing off. Sometimes these can be a pain. That came out nice. And then do the other side as well. All right, now at this point, it depends what else you have to take off. If you have some kind of cradle or lower support that has to come off, you may have to take off lower ball joint and stabilizer links, or you might be able to just undo these two bolts, attaching your steering knuckle to the bottom of your strut. So today, I'm gonna take out the cotter pin, pop the lower ball joint, and hopefully that'll give us enough room to get the steering knuckle up and away so I can get the CV axle pushed out. A really big tip for getting these to pop without damaging the rubber boot on the lower ball joint is get a big hammer and try to turn this steering knuckle as much as you can. You might have to lower the car and turn the steering wheel lock off. And you want to hit right on the back side here as hard as you can. And what you're doing is turning that internal tapered cone into an oval for a split second when you hit it hard enough. And the piece inside is a perfect tapered cone. And it doesn't like that, so it gets ejected out. And as soon as you see this gap disappear, you know you've got it popped. You also want to leave your castle nut on the end here so that if you miss, you don't smash the threads and end up having to replace this anyway. There we go, it's popped. Now, sometimes you can just kind of push here and you'll find that it actually just comes out nice and loose. And often it doesn't, and often it is completely frozen up in here. So hopefully we don't have that. Now what we can do is take our axle nut, put it on backwards, and we can try tapping on here, and that way we're not damaging the threads, and see if it just needs a bit of a tap. Sweet, that is awesome to see. Hopefully the other side is just the same. That should just pop the rest of the way out. Now, if we've got enough room to move this steering knuckle out, then we can get the CV axle out as well. There we go. Perfect. This job's going awesome. Now, to get this CV axle out from the transmission, there's a little kind of spring circlip inside that keeps it in. So you just have to pull it out hard enough that it compresses that circlip and it comes out. So usually a pry bar from behind here, you find right behind, there's a slight gap on the CV axle and the transmission. You put it in there and you can pry it or pop it out. And worst case, you might have to take a chisel on what you can get and a hammer and kind of gently tap it out this way. There we go. Now that you got that CV axle out, if you see there's a bunch of gear oil mess leak here, this is the time to change that CV axle seal into the transmission. CV axles are out, so now we're going to take off the rest of our transmission bolts. Now we're going to keep one of them in, whatever is the easiest to access, so that when we want to take this out, we can just reach out, take that off, and then the transmission comes out. All right, so the only thing holding in this manual transmission right now is one bolt to the engine, and we've got a rear engine mount, rear transmission mount that has to be undone. So before we do that, I want to have that transmission supported so that we can have an easier time taking it out and kind of support it while we're taking it out. So I'm going to be using a transmission jack, which is an awesome tool to have because this is infinitely adjustable up and down and the angles and everything. So that's a really cool thing. However, the transmission is not flat. You're going to have to put some blocks of wood, and ideally if you had some straps on there to make sure it doesn't just roll off on you, that'd be ideal. Now, you guys aren't going to have this, and you might even be just doing this at home with jacks and jack stands. That's fine, but you're going to probably want to have some way of supporting this and making it easier for you. Some little DIY trick, get a skateboard and block it up with some blocks of wood and make it so that you can roll it away from the engine when you need to. That'd be a great kind of fix. Just put a piece of plywood down underneath. Or just get in there when you're ready and muscle it out. Now, this thing's going to weigh probably about 80 pounds, so just be prepared for that. If you don't think you could lift 80 pounds and wrestle with it for a couple minutes, maybe get someone to help you. Time for the last rear engine mount. Now, when you're ready to take the transmission out, a couple of pry bars and some wiggling and moving and making sure that you have the jack stand and the transmission kind of lined up with the engine as you're pulling, that should just come off. Now, sometimes it really helps to have a friend kind of help so they can spot and make sure that you're not getting it kind of cocked at an angle and getting it jammed. Okay, to take the clutch cover and pressure plate off, you're going to have to stick a screwdriver into the teeth of the flywheel and put it right next to where one of the dowel pins are. That way when you go lefty-loosey, the flywheel will stop moving and you can take those bolts out. Now, some people take a look at these flywheel surfaces and reuse them depending on whether they are flat or not, or maybe they'll stick a dial indicator on it and spin the motor over by hand to see how much run out there is. And as long as there's no kind of heat marking or any kind of scoring or anything like that, they will reuse them. However, I'm a firm believer that if you are doing a clutch and you're already down to here, you might as well take it off and go get this machined. It's going to be probably about $80 to $100, and I think it's well worth it to make sure that this job is going to be done correctly. Now that we've got the clutch all apart, we can take a look and see actually how bad it's worn, and you can see literally the little shiny spots in some of these rivets that's holding the friction material down. This is completely 100% used up. Now, when you're going to go get your clutch, you don't just get the clutch plate, you get a clutch kit, which is going to come with your clutch plate, your pressure plate, and a throwout bearing, as well as a little plastic installer alignment tool that you use in this hole. So go ahead and just get the whole kit. All right, in the interest of keeping these videos a little bit shorter for you guys, I'm going to chop it right there and make a part 2 video where I'm going to show you how to install the flywheel, the clutch, the throwout bearings, all that little finicky stuff, and of course put the transmission back together. Now, if you have any questions about what we did in this video, feel free to put a comment down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And if you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram so you can see all the behind the scenes stuff going on in the shop in between videos. Till next time, take it easy.